So I'm first going to show some really the basics of how we improve the editor, and then Tomas is going to go a bit more technical. So we have Unity here, and the first thing when you start checking out the 2D tools is you'll notice that when you create a new project, there is this guy here that says set up defaults, and you get two options, 3D and 2D. And at this point, you don't really need to know if you're making a 3D game or a 2D game, so you don't need to be afraid of this selection here. You can always go back and change this, and mostly what this does is that it affects the texture importer defaults and also sets up the scene camera. So it's not a big deal. So I'm going to pick 2D. We're going to create a new project. And the first thing everyone wants to do is to create a sprite. So how do you create a sprite? And it's really easy. I have some sprites here on my hard disk. And all I need to do is just drag one of them straight into the scene view. And that's all it takes. Of course, you can drag them into the project tab like this. And then from the project tab, you can drag on the scene. And the second thing you'll probably notice, and this was already on the keynote, that we have this new gizmo when you're handling the sprites. And it allows you to do all sorts of things much easier than the 3D gizmos. So you can scale like this. You can also rotate. And you can also do stuff like this. This is my personal favorite. It's called squashing. I guess if there's any animators in the crowd, you'll know what this does. And it's really useful. You can also do multi-selection. So if I was building a level and this was sort of like a compound shape made out of multiple sprites, I could move the pivot here. Maybe I want to do a downhill here. So it does this. And it's really much more convenient compared to the old gizmos we had. We also improved how you pick stuff from the scene view. I mean, before, if you had things like this, a lot of 2D sprites on top of each other, and you tried to pick stuff, it was almost random which one got picked, because the picking was based on a mesh. And now we may changed it so that it's based on the actual pixels, the actual alpha. So now you always pick the one that you're trying to pick. And the last thing I'm going to show is this 2D mode toggle, also featured in the keynote. And it allows you to tweak stuff in the 3D, because most of the games nowadays, they aren't strictly 2D. They're a mix of 2D and 3D. So you need to go to the 3D world and do stuff, then you need to go back. And you can also do this. You can also start a new scene view. And you might have the 3D here. You can see what is happening. At the same time, you can tweak stuff in the convenience of the 2D stuff, the 2D gizmos. And in the future, we're of course going to do a lot of stuff with this stuff like snapping and all sorts of things to help you build levels. So that's the basic editor improvements. I'm going to give Tomas a turn. Let's show the slides too.
Is it on now? Okay, cheers. Okay, so moving forwards, let's talk about what actually the 2D framework is built of. Let's start with what exactly is a sprite in Unity terminology. So a sprite is a new type of asset, and this asset can be generated using the texture importer. because all of the 2D assets that you're going to put into Unity will be based on image files. And the texture importer gained a new texture type, which is called Sprite, and that opens up a few new options that you can modify. The first one is the Sprite mode, and when you have a single Sprite mode selected, we create a sprite using the whole texture area. And so that's how you define the in-game sprite size. There's another option, multiple or manual, which will let you use the Sprite Editor to define multiple sprites in one image file. The second good feature about this is that we do alpha cutouts for rendering to save fill rate. And here's an example of this mushroom image being cut out. The texture is actually pretty large, and we have this adaptive algorithm to determine what's the savings benefit of using this mesh. So if you have very large textures, we'll spend more vertices on cutting it out. So obviously, when you import image files, there's no relation to the actual size of the sprite in scene. So for this, we added a pixels to units ratio, which lets you define how many pixels become 1 unit of the mesh in world space. So that's how you can set up your art assets to be of reasonable size in the world space. Also, for physics, this is useful. Physics engines don't like very big values. For example, the Box2D that we have expects your collidables to be like 1 to 10 units for best performance or in precision. Also, this is useful if you want to do a transition from SD to HD graphics, for example. So if you bring in a image that's twice the size, you can set the pixels to units ratio to be twice the size, and it will still have the same dimensions in the game world. Right. So now you have this new sprite asset. What can you do with it? So we've dropped the whole mesh filter, mesh render workflow for this and created a brand new render, which is very optimized for 2D. And here it is. The first thing you notice is that it accepts a sprite asset type. So at this point, it's completely decoupled from the actual image file that you use. And internally, we might modify that reference to the image file as we please. For example, when we do sprite packing, we might replace it with a reference of the texture that is the atlas. Another thing is this color property, which directly sets the vertex color on the mesh that we generate. So you can use this for tinting or actually hook it up in your material and shader in any way that you wish. A very exciting new thing is the simplified material workflow. In 3D, you expect to set up a material for every texture combination and color combination that you need, but it seemed like a really painful thing to do for 2D. So we've extended the material property block to actually support setting the texture as well. And what this means is that you can make an entire 2D game with you just using one material. The Sprite Renderer will automatically patch the material property block of the renderer with the texture that's referenced by the sprite, and therefore you just assign the same material that doesn't have a texture bound, and it all works. Then comes the sorting layer controls. It's a new feature that I'll talk about in the next slide. Sprite Renderer has it exposed because that's where you'll be using the new feature mostly. But all renderers actually have this feature, and you can access it using the scripting API. So this feature is good for 2D and 3D, and if you're mixing the two, you can, for example, make shuriken particle systems that's layered in between 2D elements and create very awesome particles that way. And batching works with non-uniform scaling. So this is something that a lot of people were asking for, and we have it for 2D now. I don't know if it's coming in 3D, unfortunately. Okay, moving on to sorting layers. So sorting layers is a brand new thing that we've added to the tags and layers inspector. Here you can define layers that are used for sorting renderables. And if you can imagine the whole render pipeline in Unity having a queue of renderables to render, this thing lets you split it up into large chunks called layers. You can define your own for background or characters, etc. And you can specify an in-layer order value per renderer and order them any way you want. And only then, if both layer and the depth match, it will fall back to using Unity's current sorting mechanism. So those layers, of course, can be sorted in the editor. They get fixed at runtime. And to make scene view picking easier, we enabled a feature that lets you lock the layers in the scene view, so you can disable picking for like background elements or something that you're not actively working on. So that should improve workflow significantly, I think. Then there's the Sprite Packer. Currently, it's a pro-only feature. It is a fully automatic method of packing sprites into atlases, and we do it behind the scenes. All you need to do is go into the texture importer of an image and set an atlas name. What happens then, Unity picks all of the sprites that belong to the textures, sorts them by the atlas name, then sorts them by texture import settings, so we don't change the actual visual look of what you intended to do by accidentally messing with compression or whatever, and packs them into new textures, texture atlases. And then the sprite references get replaced with the new textures. Therefore, to you as a user, you don't actually see any difference if you're using atlases or not, because you're always operating with the sprite assets. And I think that's very convenient. Also, this works in play mode, so when you press play, if the sprite cache is not up to date, we'll update it, and you can examine the metafits that it gives to your game. We don't pack rectangles, we pack meshes, so it's more complicated, but it gives a very tight packing. And here's an example of a few mushrooms packed very tightly. I'll just scroll back. And you can see the mesh here. So this is the mesh that we use when we actually pack the atlas. And finally, this new Sprite Packer window will let you debug atlases and view the local cache. So the way it works at a high level is that you have only one scripting API function to call, which is repack my atlases if they need repacking, which will go over all of the asset database and make sure the local cache of atlases is up to date. And it's a very quick operation to do. And finally, 2D physics. We've integrated Box2D as a modular physics system. Modular meaning that if you don't use it, it will not go into your build, and that decreases the distribution size. So you can choose that, or choose PhysX, or choose both actually at the same time. We've added a set of standard physics components that you would expect. So rigid body, a lot of colliders and joints, and we have plans to add more. It was just not enough time for 4.3, but this is a good amount of components. One workflow change that we made from 3D is to put the actual shape of the collider on the polygon collider 2D component, not in a separate asset. This was deemed very, this showed like the workflow is very convenient for 2D games where you want to tweak everything very precisely. The polygon editor you see on the lower right lets you modify the shapes, which are initially generated from the sprites themselves. So if you just leave the default settings, you'll get a pretty detailed outline, and then you can change the alpha cutoff and detail values to modify it to suit your game. Like you don't want, hundreds of vertices on dynamic rigid bodies. There's also detect hull options if you want to use that. Of course, it makes more complicated meshes. And yeah, that's the general overview of the whole internals, and I'll now let Juha do more demoing of the Sprite Editor and animation window.
Thanks. So first I'm going to show what is the Sprite Editor. We're going to import a new texture. Let's go to default layout. And this is a very common situation you have. You have one texture and it has a lot of sprites. And you want to use these sprites in your game, so you need to set the sprite mode as manual. By default, it's single, which means that the entire texture is one single sprite. But we want the manual now. I'm going to apply. And we open up the Sprite Editor. So what the Sprite Editor does is you're basically telling Unity that, hey, here is a sprite. Here's another one. Here's another one, and so on and so on. But I mean, if you had 300 sprites here, this would take a whole afternoon. So we provided this automatic option that basically does this for you. So all you need to do is click slice here, and all the regs are correct. This works most of the time. And I mean, really like 90% of the sprite sheet we tested, it just works. But sometimes you have sprites like, say you have an explosion, and there's a lot of small fragments, then it, of course, doesn't work. But you always have the manual option. And you also have this option here. You can say that, hey, I only want 10 pixel by 10 pixel size sprites or bigger. And if it finds a small one, it will join the small fragments in the closest big one. But this works now. We're going to apply. And we're going to see here in the project tab that the sprites are now available. You can also give them proper names. I'm going to name a few of these. Makes sense later in the demo. Here we go. We apply. So now we can drag these guys in the scene. We can build our character. And we can also do this. We can reopen the Sprite Editor from here. And say if I want to make this sprite to just be the mouth, I can just do this and apply, and it will apply it on the scene. And if I click something on the scene, you can see that I get the same sprite activated. So I don't have to go and find it from the project tab. I can just click a sprite from the scene, and I can tweak it from the Sprite Editor. Let's put this back now. There's the trim button here for convenience. You most likely want to trim it to the alpha, and that's what the automatic slicing does too. So let's apply. And the next I'm going to show is we made a lot of changes to the animation window, and I'm going to make a really simple animation now to demonstrate those changes. So let's open up the animation window. Whoops. And we also need to create an empty game object to be the root, because that's what you do when you animate stuff. Call this the bean man. Extract all the game objects there. And so here's the new animation window, and this part here is the dope sheet. That's the new thing. Also, if you've been using the old animation window, you'll notice that there's really nothing here on the left, while with the old one, you would have a lot of stuff. And we decided that it's important to show only the stuff that you're animating. So now when we create a clip here, it's empty, and there's nothing. And so let's make our first keyframe. I'm going to rotate the mustache. And now you can see we get our first row in the dope sheet. It's the mustache rotation. And if I expand this, you can see there's the components of the rotation. Let's make some more keyframes. So you can record the stuff you do on the scene view, and you always get a keyframe. A couple more. We're going to make the mustache shake. This is how it looks. And it looks to me like it wants to explode, right? So luckily, our sprite sheet has some explosion sprites. And next I'm going to show how the sprite animation works. There's a couple of ways to make sprite animation. One way would be to click this here, add curve. We would go to the mustache, Sprite Renderer, and I would click the plus here. But I'm not going to do it. I'm going to do the other way, which is I'm going to scrap the time where I want my keyframe to appear. And the way this recording works in the animation window is that whatever you do in the scene, there's a good probability that it will get recorded as a keyframe. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace the mustache with the first sprite from the explosion animation. So I'm just going to drag this here, replace the mustache, and you're going to see that we have a new row here in the dope sheet. And this is our sprite animation. If I expand, you can see there's a keyframe, and there's the mustache. And this is what happens. And let's take the rest of the animation. Here we go. This is how it looks. Yay. And I'm just going to make an extra keyframe here at the end because we want the clip to be a little bit longer. Looks like this. The last thing to do here is I don't want the red sprite to linger because it's an explosion. I want it to go away. So actually we want the whole sprite renderer to be disabled. And again, what I'm going to do is scrap the time to where I want it to go away. Like I said, if I change something on the scene, it will get recorded. And you can actually just disable the sprite renderer. And here we go, we have another new keyframe, another row in the dope sheet. And this is a Boolean curve now. Well, actually, it's a float curve, but it's a Boolean value. And you can see how the sprite renderer is disabled here. And if I scrap here, it's enabled. And if I look at the curve, it looks like this. Here it's enabled, here it's disabled. And I can even add keyframes just checking this box here. You can also do stuff here in the dope sheet, like I can copy paste, of course. Stuff you couldn't really do in the old window. Let's look how the animation now plays out. Great. So that's how you combine keyframe animation and sprite animation. It's all in the one system. We didn't want to do two separate systems because then you couldn't do the mix. And we're going to improve the animation window even more in the future. So please come to the hands-on lab, give us feedback. That's all the things. Oh yeah, so you can also create a new animation by selecting these 4 sprites. And if I drag it here, it creates a new game object with new clip and new animation. So that's a quick way if you have a frame-by-frame sprite animation. And also one thing to note here is that what happened to my clip? Well, shit happens. So we still have a clip here. So I wanted to point out that whenever you animate something, you record a new keyframe. You can see how it turns yellow here. And this makes it obvious that these numbers now come from the clip. This is what you're animating. These numbers, they come from the scene. So you would easily get mixed up without this. And that's the end of this demo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so a few quick takeaways of what we've showed you. Why is this good for beginners? Obviously, because you get an out-of-the-box experience of creating 2D content with Unity. And why is this good for experienced devs? Well, for example, asset store devs can now base their 2D workflows on the new asset, benefit from what we offer, and expand on the functionalities. Also, I got a few questions like, why didn't we add feature X to the 4.3 release? Obviously, it's because of the lack of time, but 2D is a very iterative feature at Unity, I think more so than others, so we'll be adding tiny bits of it to every version 4X cycle and onwards. And some very good news to all the beta users. I don't know if you noticed, but a few hours ago, we've actually released 4.3 beta. You can download it now and have a play with all the features. And if you have any feedback, we're having a feedback and Q&A panel on Friday, I think at 11:30. So you can come over and tell us what you think about it. Or just hop on to the hands-on labs and you'll find us there. And I don't see my slide. Right, and now our time's up. I'll ask Michael, the author of GUI, to join us on stage and tell us about the new GUI, and then we can have Q&A.